Hello, everyone. Welcome to this session on banking and financial awareness. And the way we're going to look at it is going to be run in the form of a test wherein we have 40 questions to be attempted and we will keep it on the lines of the RRB mains, right? So that's the agenda. So 40 important questions to be targeted today. And how are we going to address this? Very simple test, 40 questions, 40 marks allocated to it. 1/4 negative marking for every incorrect answer. That's going to be definitely there. Additionally, what I'm going to do is that I'm going to allot only 15 minutes for this, keeping in mind that the consolidated exam has a total duration of 120 minutes. How much time do you want to give to your general awareness section? That will probably be not more than 15 to 20 minutes, right? Obviously, if you know a lot of stuff, you might end up spending more time on it, but just keep one thing very clearly in mind. You want to note the exact time that you spend, because what it tells you is whatever additional every single minute that you're spending on this particular section, it is coming at an opportunity cost, which means that this 1 minute could have actually been spent elsewhere in the exam, and that could also give you good return on marks, right? So the idea is very simple. Look at the ROM, return on marks, in terms of the time invested, right? So every single minute that you're spending on this section, it needs to add value, right? If it's not adding value, if there is anywhere else in the exam that this extra 1 or 2 minutes can actually add value, please go and spend that extra 1 or 2 minutes over there, right? Which is why I'm asking you to keep an exact note of time. So obviously you got to keep a buffer in terms of the way we're going to administer this as well, right? So we're going to look at administering it in the form of questions appearing on the screen, 2 at a time, right? So obviously I'll show the screen for a few seconds. You basically have to pause it at your end, and either you can take the test at one shot, or you can basically look at attempting those 2 questions that are there on the screen by pausing the video at that point in time and then proceed to the next section. So the idea is very simple. It's up to you guys. 2 questions at a time will appear on the screen. So keep a buffer of 1 or 2 minutes overall in the entire time allocation itself, right? So whatever time is being let's say taken for pausing your video and doing all those additional bits, you can probably deduct that time at the end, right? But whatever time you're actually spending on solving that particular question, keep a note of that exact time so that you're aware of how much time you've actually spent. So if it is going beyond 15 minutes, obviously then it's a opportunity cost associated with it, wherein you got to look at deducting maybe 1 or 2 marks for every single extra minute that you're spending on this section. So that's the context, right? This is just to give you put a bit of pressure on the overall scheme of things over here, so that once that pressure is there, you will try to complete this section as quickly as possible and not waste any unwanted time here. That's the reason why this time pressure has been put. Otherwise, if you just want to take the test normally, you can do that without actually putting any time pressure as it is on this particular exam. Take this as a practice, right? And whenever you're attempting any mocks, then you specifically apply the time limit. So that's entirely up to you guys. So that's your call, because at the end of the day, you are the one who is watching the video. Having said that, this is what I'll keep in mind. 40 questions, 40 marks, 1/4 negative marking for every incorrect answer. And with that, we basically start the test, and all the best to you guys. So once the test is completed, we will basically look at the entire analysis of it in terms of how you could have approached it, and more importantly, what are the answers to the questions as well. So that's what I had in mind, and without further ado, let's jump right in. So as I said, I'll basically run you through the questions very quickly, probably pause the video for a few seconds, and whatever way you want to approach it, you can either start attempting these questions and then look at moving to the next lot of questions, or you can collect all the questions at one place and then attempt it together. So it's entirely up to you guys. So these are the first set of 2 questions. Moving on to the next screen. This questions 3 and 4, 5 and 6, 7 and 8, 9 and 10, 11 and 12, 13 and 14, 15, 16, 17, 18, 19, 20, 21, 22, 23, 24, 25, 26, 27, 28. So this is 29, 30, 31, 32, 33, 34, 35, 36, 37, 38, and the last screen 39 and 40. Right, so these are the 40 questions that are there. So I hope you've taken cognizance of the questions that are there. So it's up to you. You can either pause the video and try to answer the questions there and then itself, or you can collate all the questions and answer them together. Entirely your call. Now let's quickly move to the analysis. So I hope you enjoyed the set of questions that were there and you took the test, and if you'd been someone who's actually been reading up regularly, then I'm sure that you would have found that most of these questions were fairly easy and straightforward and answerable. There were a couple of questions which required some bit of thinking, but other than that, I think it was fairly straightforward overall. Obviously, if you've been someone who's been regularly following the news that's happening on the banking and financial front, right? So without further ado, I'll move myself away from the screen and we'll look at each of these individual questions. And what I'll try and do is, of course, not just tell you the answer, but also what is the thought process behind some of the other options that have been given in those answers, and what is the logic behind some of those things as well. So some of those options are also important bits of information, and I'll try and sharing those informations with you as well. So that will be the idea with which we'll be approaching this analysis. But obviously it might take some bit of time. Having said that, it's going to help you. So it's not just answering that particular question. It's actually going to help you maybe come up with, let's say, 4 or 5 additional questions that can be there, right? So that's the thought process, that we'll try and look at the options as well and try and see what is something important that has happened from that options perspective, if at all there is something to be read or dealt with from that standpoint. So that's how we'll try and approach this. So I'll move myself quickly away from the screen and we will get into analyzing each of these questions. Right, so the first question that we're looking at is talking about PM Shri Narendra Modi on 2nd of August 2021 launched a cashless and contactless instrument as a digital payment solution, right? And this instrument's voucher is obviously going to play a huge role in making your direct benefit transfers, which is the transfer of the subsidy directly into the account of the beneficiaries. That is obviously going to become more effective in terms of the digital transactions in the country and also give a new dimension to the digital governance. So obviously all of you are aware of what the instrument is. What I want to check was whether you know the exact name and have you got it correctly or not. So the answer in this case is option number C, which is e-Rupee. Now it's basically a digital voucher which the beneficiary gets on his phone, either in the form of an SMS or a QR code, and all he or she has to do is basically, it's a prepaid voucher of course. So all he or she has to do is basically present this at any of the centers where it is accepted, and he or she can basically redeem that accordingly. So that is the thought process on this one, right? So next, moving on to the second question, it says that Dash proposes to be the acquiring of stressed assets of about 2 lakh crores in phases, with extent regulations of the RBI as the key guidelines that it will follow. And it intends to basically acquire these assets through 15% of cash payment and 85% payment happening through security receipts. So that is one of the entities. And Dash, on the other hand, is a service company or an operational entity which will manage the asset and engage market professionals or specialists and turnaround experts, right? And the public sector banks and the public financial institutions will hold a maximum of 49% stake in this company or in this operational entity, and the rest will be held by the private sector lenders. So that is the 2 entities that we're specifically talking about. Now, which are the ones? We will basically be talking about the NARCL and IDRCL, which are the 2 entities specifically we are looking at. So when I talk about NARCL, it is basically the National Asset Reconstruction Company Limited. So that is what NARCL stands for. And basically it's again a type of an asset reconstruction company only, but it's been specifically categorized as a new entity that has been formed now. Now talking about IDRCL, it basically is the India Debt Resolution Company Limited. So that will be the entity which will act as the management of the assets. So whatever assets have been bought on by the entity NARCL, that will be managed by IDRCL. That's the thought process overall. Right. So again, another interesting development that happened was that the central government also came up with a guarantee of 30,600 crore to basically back these security receipts, right, which will be issued by NARCL, right? And obviously the point is that these security receipts will be issued for acquiring the stressed loan assets, and this guarantee part has basically been also approved by the Union Cabinet, right? Now, talking about NARCL, it was incorporated under the Companies Act and has obviously applied to the Reserve Bank of India for the license as an asset reconstruction company, right? And NARCL has been set up by banks to basically aggregate and consolidate all their stressed assets that are there with them for their subsequent resolution, right? Now, the PSBs will basically again maintain an ownership, or public sector banks will maintain an ownership of 51% in NARCL. And obviously, the question that might come to your mind is, obviously there were so many other asset reconstruction companies that were already there. So what was the need for another company of this format? But see, the point is, many of these ARCs have been useful in terms of providing good resolution mechanisms, right? And also we talk about some of the other entities like the Indian Bankruptcy Code, and we talk about the SARFAESI Act. All these have also helped in ensuring that restructuring of loans, or let's say bringing back the NPAs into performing assets, has definitely happened. But they have not been sufficient enough, right? So in terms of their measures that they are providing, the measures have not been completely useful, in the sense that there is still a lot of NPAs in the banking system, right? So from that perspective, NARCL was established. Now talking about IDRBT and DICGC, these are again entities which are important from an RBI standpoint, not necessarily subsidiaries of RBI, but IDRBT is the entity which is specifically focusing on banking technology and bringing up new research work in that front, right? So that is what IDRBT is doing. And DICGC is obviously your Deposit Insurance Credit Guarantee Corporation. So any bank that goes under, the depositors of that bank are basically insured by DICGC. That's what it is. CRISIL and CARE are basically rating agencies that also constantly release numbers with respect to the India's GDP as well, and a lot of other numbers. And they also release rating related data. So those are the rating agencies from an India standpoint. Now technically NARCL is also referred to as a bad bank, so technically this option could have still fitted in, but then Kotak Mahindra AMC or Kotak AMC is not the entity which has been created for the second purpose, right? So why would a private sector AMC operate for the public sector? So in that context, this option obviously goes out of the window. So the correct answer in this case is NARCL and IDRCL, right? So that's the context. Now the other important thing is that you may ask as to why is it required for the government to basically bring in a guarantee of 30,600 crores. See, the point is, if people want to take the NARCL seriously, right, and if there is going to be some value attached to the security receipts that are being provided by NARCL, then there has to be some kind of a guarantee given by the government ki boss, ye hoga, this will happen. Right, and even if the security receipts or any kind of default happens at a later stage, it is still being guaranteed by the government that this money will be returned eventually, right? That's the whole context. So the security receipts will be backed by government guarantee, which will be valid for a period of 5 years. The only condition precedent is that in case of the invocation of the guarantee would be either in the form of a resolution for that stressed asset, which means that it has to be resolved by some of the means that are there, or a complete liquidation. So one of those two processes need to happen, and that is where the invocation will happen, right? So that is the context. Now second aspect of it is that as soon as the government guarantee comes in, the security receipts also become tradable in the secondary market, so which obviously creates a market in terms of providing greater amount of liquidity for such security receipts, because you understand that these are backed by the government also, right? So that is the context. Now how will this entire concept work? So the NARCL will basically go and approach will make an offer to the lead bank in the sense that there are, let's say if there are multiple banks which have lent to a particular entity which has now become a non-performing asset, then there will obviously be a lead bank which is the major lender. So NARCL will basically provide an offer or make an offer to the lead bank and acquire these assets. Now once NARCL's offer is accepted, then IDRCL will basically be engaged in terms of the management and the value addition as well, right? So that is what I wanted to discuss in terms of this, and let's quickly move on to the answers here. So essentially you have e-rupee, and you basically have NARCL and IDRCL as the answer to this particular question. Okay, let's move on to the next set, which basically is questions 3 and 4. So a type of RBI regulated entity that basically helps in individuals securely and digitally access and share information from one financial institution they have an account with to other regulatory financial institution in the network. So essentially I'm talking about account aggregators. So it is a type of an NBFC, and this data cannot be shared without the consent of the individual. So that's very, very clear. So technically your NBFC peer-to-peer lending appears in a different context, wherein you say that whenever you're having a lending wherein you have, let's say, peers lending to others, right? So it's sort of a marketplace for lending. So that is what is basically referred to as a NBFC P2P. Small finance banks and your payments banks are obviously working in very different contexts, right? And your regional rural banks are focusing specifically on the regions in the rural area. So all these three do not fit into the context. So the tug of war or the fight was between NBFC AA and NBFC P2P. So in that context, NBFC account aggregators is actually the correct answer. Right. So basically, in the first week of September, what has happened is that India unveiled something called as an account aggregator network. Right. So that is something that happened. Right. And this is basically a financial data sharing system that could revolutionize investing and credit, giving millions of consumers greater access and control over their own financial records. Right, so that's the whole idea, and obviously it will expand the potential pool of customers for the lenders as well as for the fintech companies. Your account aggregator basically empowers the individual with basically having a control over their personal financial data, right, which otherwise will remain in silos. So this is obviously a first step towards bringing what is known as open banking, wherein the information gets shared readily but not without consent. Right, so that is the open banking initial footsteps that are happening in India, and this could obviously empower millions of customers to digitally access and share their financial data across institutions in a secure and an efficient manner. Right. So the account aggregator system in banking has started off with 8 of India's largest banks already being there, or rather 4 are actually already sharing data based on consent. Now, which are these 4 which are already sharing data? We're talking about Axis, ICICI, then you're talking about HDFC, and then you're talking about IndusInd. So these are the 4 entities or banks which are already sharing the data, and 4 others have basically going to be joining shortly. So which is your SBI, then you talk about your Kotak Mahindra Bank, then your IDFC First Bank, and then Federal Bank. So these are the other 4 which will be joining these first 4 pretty shortly. So there are already 8 banks which have basically started the thought process of working, and I'm pretty sure that the other banks would follow suit as well, but these are the 8 that are already there. So that is the context that I wanted to highlight here as well, right? An important thing is that the account aggregator system can make lending and wealth management a lot faster and cheaper, because the entities which have the information can easily share it across the network, right? And let's say, for example, you may have a question that you already have things like an Aadhaar eKYC and a central repository of KYC, that is CKYC, that is already there. But the problem is that they are there only for sharing 4 identity data fields for the KYC purposes. So for example, when you talk about Aadhaar KYC or CKYC, only the name, address, gender, etc. can actually be shared. Right. So similarly, when your credit bureau data is there, it only shows, let's say, loan history or only the credit score. But the account aggregator network allows the sharing of transactional level data and also the banking statements from your savings, deposits, and your current accounts as well. So from that perspective, it's actually a game changer in terms of data sharing, and that is where your NBFC AAs have a huge role to play in the open banking scheme of things as far as India is concerned. Right. So let's look at the next question now. We're talking about the Asian Development Bank, and the government of India sanctioned a 300 million loan, and this was pretty recently, that happened in the month of September only, right, as additional financing to basically scale up improvement of rural connectivity to kind of help boost the rural economy in one of the states, and a $112 million loan to basically develop water supply infrastructure and strengthen the capacities of urban local bodies to improve the service delivery in 4 towns in another state. So basically, understand one thing, that Asian Development Bank constantly has been doing good work with the government of India and has been providing a lot of funding to various projects in India across different states, and that's how it basically operates, wherein it basically targets a particular state and provides funding for specific requirements of that state. So in this context, the answer here is basically Maharashtra, wherein it is providing rural connectivity to boost the rural economy, and then we're talking about the state of Jharkhand in terms of providing water supply infrastructure and improving the capacities of the urban local body. So that's the answer in this case, which you're talking about Maharashtra and Jharkhand. So that will be the consolidated final answers to these set of questions. Now moving on to the next set. The e-filing portal of the Income Tax Department was basically launched on, and this was obviously on 7th. Now the question is, which 7th was it? So obviously it's not 2020 for sure. It's definitely 2021. And I know that the entity which is basically in news for a lot of wrong reasons, wherein the portal has not been working as effectively as it is supposed to. So the entity that is there is definitely Infosys and not TCS in this case. So the answer in this case is definitely Infosys, and the answer is 7th of June. That is when this basically happened. Now the next question talks about September 8th, 2021. Rajiv Chandrasekhar, the minister, part of the Ministry of Electronics, Minister of State for Electronics and IT, basically graced the launch program of Dash, right? and announcement of 100% digital literacy of all digital villages. So there was a launch program that happened for one of these schemes, right? And which scheme was that? We'll discuss that in the next slide very quickly. So the answer to the first one is of course 7th of June 2021 and Infosys Limited, and the answer to the next one is basically talking about the Pradhan Mantri Grameen Digital Saksharta Abhiyan, that is PMG Disha, and that is the launch program that basically happened. So now I understand one thing, that this was not the scheme itself being launched, which was obviously launched a little earlier, right? And this was the launch program of the PMG Disha Drive. That is what happened on this particular day, right? And talking about the other schemes that are there, so you're talking about the Deen Dayal Antyodaya Yojana, which is the National Rural Livelihoods Mission. That's a different scheme altogether. Talking about the Pradhan Mantri Jan Dhan Yojana, that's a different scheme. Then you talk about PMAY, which is your Pradhan Mantri Awas Yojana, and then PMSBY, which is your Pradhan Mantri Suraksha Bima Yojana. So all these are different schemes and yojanas that are there. But in the context of the drive for digital literacy for all digital villages, obviously you're talking about the Digital Saksharta Abhiyan, because that is what talks about digital literacy as a whole. So that is the answer in this particular case. Right. So let's move on to the next set of questions. Right, so the Competition Commission of India basically approved the acquisition of Indiabulls Asset Management Company Limited and the Indiabulls Trustee Company Limited by which of these entities? Now the question here is obviously Indiabulls has obviously been under a lot of rough weather in terms of being one of those NBFCs which was hugely regulated by the governing bodies. So obviously it was not in a great position and had to be acquired. That was the only way to make it running, right? So that was the whole context. So in this case, basically the entity which has gone on to acquire rather, or is going to acquire based on the approval that has been received from CCI, is Next Billion Technology Private Limited, which is a stockbroker and a depository participant as well, and it is also registered with the Association of Mutual Funds of India, right? And technically, it's a mutual fund distributor as well and is engaging in providing online platform as well. So you would have definitely heard the name of this entity, which is Grow, which is its online platform of Next Billion Technology that basically allows investors to invest in mutual funds and stocks, right? So you must be definitely aware of Grow. So Next Billion Technology is the company that is floating Grow. That is the whole idea, right? So the next entity that I want to talk about is CoinDCX, which now recently basically got a Series C funding of around $90 million with a valuation of 1.1 billion. So technically it becomes the first crypto entity in India which is basically become a unicorn. So any unicorn is obviously a company which is valued at greater than $1 billion. So CoinDCX becomes the first unicorn in the context of your crypto entities. Right. Then you talk about BharatPe. So BharatPe obviously is in talks recently because of obviously the way it is looking at hiring people in the tech space, wherein it's being talked about that they're going to basically give Mercedes to people that are being hired from that perspective in order to attract talent. It also basically came up with a joint venture with another non-banking financial company, which is your Centrum Finance. And both of these basically came together and basically were looking at acquiring the troubled Punjab and Maharashtra Cooperative Bank, right? And this is obviously a landmark event for your fintech players who are harboring any kind of ambitions in the banking space. So BharatPe and Centrum Finance came together to basically take over Punjab and Maharashtra Cooperative Bank, right? And Bajaj Finserv is also recently in news along with another entity called as Samco Securities, wherein both of these entities were basically provided the mutual fund license by the Reserve Bank of India. So all these options are definitely relevant in that context. Now moving on to the next question. So this basically talks about a very interesting concept called as FOSS, which is basically your free and open source software, which means that when you say something is open source, that it can basically be accessed by anyone, and the source code is basically available for others to access, and they can make changes to it and add their own code on top of it. So that is basically what your open source is all about. So basically is saying that your FOSS refers to your free and open source software in the government, right? And this was a virtual roundtable discussion was organized by the Ministry of Electronics and Information Technology, which is METI, right? And essentially this talked about increasing the awareness in terms of the usage of free and open source software in governance as well as the functioning of the government. and adoption of FOSS, and this basically was something which happened in the month of April 2021 this year as well. Now, what has happened through this initiative is that on the occasion of the 7th anniversary of MyGov, which is obviously a very useful website overall, the Ministry of Electronics and Information Technology launched the Innovation Challenge to accelerate the adoption of technology in government and building an Indian ecosystem on the similar lines in terms of e-governance. That was the whole thought process. Now, through this challenge, various innovators, be it startups, working professionals, academics, and students in India, are invited to basically showcase their existing free and open source software based innovations and or build new or implementable open source product innovations that are there. Now, technically speaking, when I say ERP, it refers to enterprise resource planning. FinTech, you guys already know. CRM refers to customer relationship management. Right, so all these are ways in which or rather areas or avenues in which your free and open source software can actually be provided. Right, so that is the context of these additional terms. Now, talking about GEM, it refers to the government e-marketplace, which again is a forum where you can basically ensure that any kind of supplies that are required from a government standpoint, then that can actually be accessed from that portal. So that is your government e-marketplace. So these are the other options. The answer in this case is FOSS for government. That's the correct answer. Now, talking about this particular anniversary celebration, so Shri Piyush Goyal, the Minister of Commerce and Industry, Consumer Affairs, Food and Public Distribution and Textiles, basically chaired this particular meeting. So that is the context of these two questions. Now, moving on to the next set of questions. Right, so these were the answers: Next Billion and FOSS for government. Next up, we're looking at September 3rd, 2021. The 11th BRICS Trade Ministers meeting was held in a virtual format under the chairmanship of India. So India is the entity here, which was the chair for this year. And the meeting was attended by the trade and economic ministers of the BRICS countries. Which are the BRICS countries? Obviously, you have Brazil, Russia, India, China, South Africa, right? Moving on to the next question, we're basically talking about what happened on 14th of September 2021 when the RBI and the Monetary Authority of Singapore basically came together and announced a project to link their respective fast payment systems, right? So that is the context. The linkage is targeted for operationalization by July 2022. This is going to be game changing because there are two countries that are coming together and launching something of this sort. So the entities that are involved here, or rather the payment systems we're talking about, not the entities, payment systems. So which is where the answer cannot be NPCI, right? So NPCI is the entity which has created the payment system. The payment system itself is your unified payments interface, and it's not PayNet, but it is PayNow. So the answer in this case becomes UPI and PayNow, which is option number E. Now, talking about UPI PayNow, it's basically a linkage which is definitely a significant milestone in the development of infrastructure for the cross-border payments, right? So that is very, very crucial here. Cross-border payment, especially in the context of India and Singapore. So this also closely aligns with the group of 20 nations financial inclusion priorities in terms of driving faster, cheaper and more transparent cross-border payments. And this linkage was primarily possible between UPI and PayNow because of the earlier efforts of NIPL and NETS. So NIPL again refers to the international arm of NPCI, called as your NPCI International Private Limited, and basically the second one is basically the Network for Electronic Transfers, right? So here this is basically the entity which is operating in Singapore, and the main focus area for both these entities was basically to ensure interoperability, right? So when I say interoperability, you're essentially talking about the ability to do cross-border payments using cards and QR codes and ensuring cross-border interoperability between India and Singapore. And this in turn will further anchor trade, travel and the remittance flows between the two countries as well. And this initiative is also in line with RBI's vision of reviewing the corridors and charges for inbound cross-border remittances also. So from that perspective also this is quite relevant, right? So the answer in this case of course is option E, and of course India is the entity which is having the chairmanship for BRICS this year. Right, so that's the context and that's the answer: a unified payments interface and PayNow. Right. So next up, we're looking at next set of questions. So on 23rd August 2021, one has made an allocation of this. So here we're talking about the entity which is your International Monetary Fund, right? And what it did was that it basically came up with something called as a special drawing right. Now talking about SDR, it is one of the holding components of the foreign exchange reserves of any country, right? Now, IMF makes the general SDR allocation to all its members in proportion of their existing quotas in the fund. So whatever fund that IMF has, whatever is the existing proportion of each of the countries, the similar level of special drawing right will be allocated to each of the countries as well. Right? Now, the Board of Governors of IMF had basically approved a general allocation of about SDR 456 billion overall, right? And this basically happened on 2nd August 2021, and this was going to be effective 23rd August 2021. And out of this 456 billion, India's share was 12.57 billion SDR, which is equivalent to $17.86 billion, right? So technically, that is where India's overall holding stands at, SDR 13.66 billion, and that's basically $19.41 billion overall, right? So the answer in this case is option B, which is your International Monetary Fund and your special drawing rights. Now moving on to the next question, which basically talks again about a very interesting concept with respect to your currency chess, right? So here, again, RBI came up with a recent regulation wherein it said that from 1st September 2021, an incentive of dash per bag for the distribution of coins will be available instead of rupees 25 as it was earlier, and this will be paid on the basis of the net withdrawal from the currency chest and without waiting for claims from the banks to happen. An additional incentive of dash per bag would be paid for coin distribution in the rural and the semi-urban areas as well on the submission of a CA or an auditor's certificate to this effect. So basically the idea was very simple, that the RBI wanted to incentivize the distribution of coins in a better manner, and it basically enhanced the incentive per bag to rupees 65 instead of the current rupees 25 that was there, and an additional incentive of rupees 10 was to be provided per bag for coin distribution in the rural and semi-urban areas as well. So this is something that the RBI has done. So the answer in this case is option C. Right, so these are the two answers. Let's move on to the next set of questions now. So essentially 13 and 14, RBI basically in its latest circular, which was the master directions on prepaid instruments, said that these type of prepaid instruments are issued by banks and non-banks after obtaining the minimum details only of the PPI holder. So that's the first clue, right? So they shall be used only for the purchase of goods and services. That's more a generic statement that is true for all kinds of PPIs as well. Funds transfer or cash withdrawal from such PPIs shall not be permitted. That's the second clue. But it can be used at a group of clearly identified merchant locations or establishments which have a specific contract with the issuer, or a contract that is through a payment aggregator or a payment gateway, right? So technically, these are very restricted set of PPIs. Now, if you look at the latest circular, RBI has classified the initial 3 PPIs, which was the initial classification when it used to call it as open-ended PPIs, semi-closed PPIs, and closed PPIs, right? And within this, they used to call it as reloadable and non-reloadable as well. Right, so these were the initial classifications, right? But with the latest circular, which is the MD PPI, which is the master direction on PPIs, RBI has basically classified them into 2 very simple categories: small PPIs and full KYC PPIs. Now, within small PPIs are the ones which are basically allowing the PPI holder not to have major KYC to be done on it, but again with restrictions that fund transfer or cash withdrawal will not be possible. When you look at the full KYC PPIs, these are obviously PPIs which will require complete KYC to be done, but small PPIs will be the ones wherein limited KYC is required, and obviously they will have certain restrictions that are there. So again, within the context of small PPIs itself, you can basically look at whether you can load cash or you cannot load cash. So that is a subcategorization within small PPIs, but the answer in this case is only small PPIs. Next up, we're talking about the LAF or the liquidity adjustment facility and the marginal standing facility also that RBI has to be provided to the regional rural banks as well. Right, the idea was to extend this to the scheduled regional rural banks fulfilling certain criteria. The question is, which of these is or are one of the criteria, right? So look at the question very carefully. It's asking which is actually a criteria. It's not asking which is not a criteria. So read the question very carefully. So obviously those RRBs which have implemented the core banking solution, they will definitely be eligible. And second one also makes logical sense when you're saying that they're fully compliant with the terms and conditions for availing a liquidity adjustment facility and the marginal standing facility as issued by the Financial Markets Operational Division of the RBI, or other Financial Markets Operational Department of the RBI, right? So these two are definitely a must. then they need to maintain a minimum CRR of 9% and not 10%. That is the problem here, which is where this option becomes wrong. So the answer in this case is both A and B. Technically, the third criteria is that there is a minimum CRAR or a capital to risk weighted assets ratio of 9%. So had that been the case, then if ABC would have been the correct answer. But in this case, since this number is incorrect, so the answer becomes both A and B. Right. So let's move on to the next set of questions now. Which committee first recommended the establishment of RRBs? Now the question here is a slightly tricky one because there are two committees which actually talked about it. Now Mr. M. Narasimham was also considered to be the father of the Indian banking reforms overall. He obviously passed away this year, and a lot of commemoration activities also happened for him. Great man, and huge foresight he had, because he recommended a lot of these things way back in the past, when 30 years to be precise, when things were not even in the picture, he had already recommended them. Now the big question is that Narasimham, or rather M. Narasimham and Mr. Dantwala, both of them actually talked about the RRBs, right, quite extensively, and pretty much in similar times as well. So he talked about it in 1978 and he talked about it in 1976, right? But when you talk about the committee recommendations, so Dantwala committee definitely talked about the RRBs. Narasimham committee 1, which basically came in the year 1991, was much later than the Dantwala committee. So this is where, given the options in this question, I would go ahead with Dantwala committee, right? Had it just talked about M. Narasimham being the first one who talked about RRBs, then in that case I would have probably gone ahead with the M. Narasimham, right? But since it is talking specifically of the Narasimham committee 1, which is the first committee that was put up in place in the year 1991, so in that context, when you talk about the first recommended, then Dantwala committee becomes the correct answer, right? So there's a bit of confusion in this one, but technically, given that it is talking about Narasimham committee 1 and not generally talking about M. Narasimham, the answer in this case becomes Dantwala committee. Now also keep in mind that Narasimham committee also talked about setting up of a rural setup in the regional areas, right? So from that context, this committee also talked about it, but Dantwala committee was the first to kind of broach this. So that is the whole idea. Now talking about some of the other committees, the Kelkar committee obviously was talking about the reforming of the tax structure. So the GST came up under the Kelkar committee. Now Raghuram Rajan committee basically talks about the reforms for the financial sector. That's what this one talked about, right? And then the Tarapur committee basically was talking about the capital account convertibility, right? So what kind of roadmap is required to ensure that there is a full convertibility of rupee on the capital account. So that is what the Tarapur committee talked about. So the answer in this case happens to be Dantwala committee, a pretty close one. But because it says Narasimham committee 1 and not generally Narasimham committee, so I'm inclined towards using Dantwala committee as my answer, right? So it's purely driven by the options given. Now next up, under normal circumstances, the RRB's ownership structure between central government, state government and the sponsoring bank are in which kind of a shareholding pattern? So generally the maximum amount is there for the central government, which is at 50%. Then the state governments are usually at a smaller level, 15%. And then the sponsoring bank will be at a higher level, because there has to be what is known as in finance called skin in the game, right? Which means that if something goes wrong, the sponsoring bank should actually have to take a hit, right? It should have an impact. So from that perspective, the sponsoring bank definitely should have a greater share in the ownership structure, which is where your central government is at 50%, your state government is basically going to be at 15%, right? And the sponsoring bank will be at 35%. So that is the correct set of options, right? So here the answer becomes Dantwala committee, and the next one, the answer is option A, 50, 15 and 35. Be very careful in terms of which are the options mentioned where, because an unnecessary careless mistake, you might actually end up losing marks on a fairly straightforward and simple question, right? Next up, we're looking at 17 and 18. So the New Development Bank, formerly referred to as the BRICS Development Bank, that's the name change that has been given to the BRICS Development Bank. It's basically a multilateral development bank established by the BRICS states, right? So when I say states here, it refers to the countries, and obviously you're aware of which are the countries involved in BRICS. Who was the first president? Interestingly, the first president happened to be an Indian. So Mr. K.V. Kamath was the first president. Now Marcos Prado Toggio is the current president of the New Development Bank. Now Masatsugu Asakawa is the current president of Asian Development Bank. Then Kristina Georgieva is the current chief of the IMF, and David R. Malpass is the current head of the World Bank, right? So So the next question is, which committee first recommended the establishment of NABARD? So the answer in this case is the B. Sivaraman committee, and there are other options also. Let's look at them very quickly. So basically, C. Rangarajan committee basically set up a panel in terms of eliminating the poverty scale of the country. Damodaran committee basically talked about the customer service in the banks and how can you improve customer service in banks. And the Deepak Parekh committee basically talked about the financing the infrastructure sector. So these were the committees and their respective initiatives that they took. So the answer in this case happens to be B. Sivaraman committee. So these are the answers to 17 and 18. Let's quickly move on to the next set of questions. Now, 19 basically says that as per RBI's latest priority sector lending guidelines, what is the total priority sector target for the regional rural banks? So now technically, because they have a major say in terms of promoting the development of the regional areas of the rural areas of the country, so obviously they need to have a huge percentage of their targets upcoming from the priority sector. So from that logic, the answer is 75% of the adjusted net bank credit, or the credit equivalent of the off-balance sheet exposure. These are technical terms, we won't get into this right now, but it's 75% of that, whichever is higher. So that's the correct answer in this case, right? So when you talk about 40%, that is also there as the target for some of the other categories of banks in terms of scheduled commercial banks and all, right? And these are also percentages mentioned in certain regards, but technically not for the total priority sector targets for the RRBs. Now here another aspect is that out of this 75%, if you're specifically talking about certain priority sectors, right, which happens to be your lending to your medium enterprises, or you're lending to the social infrastructure, or to renewable energy, right? So if you're lending to any of these three, then the priority sector achievement can be only considered up to 15%. So let's say cumulatively you're investing, or rather providing funding to any of the entities operating as a medium enterprise or a social infrastructure or a renewable energy enterprise, then the maximum that you can consider as a contribution towards your priority sector lending target is only 15%. उसके बाद आपको बाकी sectors में या बाकी avenues में lend करना पड़ेगा, right? So it's very simple that 15% is the limit for these three categories of priority sector, and the remaining has to come from the other sectors within the priority sector lending goals, right? So next up, we are looking at a slightly tricky question here, wherein we're talking about RBI's latest PSL guidelines, but it does not tell me whether I'm talking about scheduled commercial banks or RRBs or let's say foreign banks, right? So it has to be figured out from the options as to which type of category I'm talking about, right? So when you talk about agriculture, the subcategorization in terms of targets is pretty much the same across all the three segments, which is 18%, be it scheduled commercial banks or your foreign banks greater than 20 branches or your RRBs. When it comes to micro enterprises, this also is at 7.5% in case of all the entities, right, be it scheduled commercial bank or an RRB. But when it comes to advances to weaker sections, this is slightly higher as far as RRBs is concerned, which is at 15%. But for the other categorization of banks, it basically is at 12%. So that is helping me figure out that this question is especially meant for RRBs only. And how did I figure it out? Because there is no 12% mentioned anywhere in the options. So obviously it has to be pertaining to the RRBs only. So which is the option that fits the bill perfectly? It is basically talking about the 18%, 7.5% and 15%. Now again, within this 18% itself, out of the agri target for the RRBs, there is a 10% specific additional target that has been placed within this 18%, which is meant for your small and your marginalized farmers, right? So that's the context as far as the PSL for RRBs is concerned. Now quickly moving on to the next set of questions. Right, so these are the answers in this case, right? And moving on to the next set, which basically is 21 and 22. So on 19th of August 2021, Dash became the first Indian lender to list its $1 billion foreign currency AT1 or additional tier 1 bonds priced at 3.7% on the International Financial Service Center, which is your IFSC, which is based out of the GIFT City, that is your Gujarat International Finance Tech City, GIFT City, Gujarat. So technically, while it is placed out of India, the IFSC is placed out of India, but it is more for the international markets. That is why it is known as the International Financial Service Center. And HDFC basically became the first bank or first lender to list its $1 billion foreign currency AT1 bonds. Right. So another question on AT1 bonds basically talks about one of the boards of one of the leading banks in India basically approved raising of capital, right, through the issue of Basel III AT1 bonds and AT2 bonds right, or a combination of both of these in one or more tranches up to an amount of 6,000 crore rupees. So whenever we're talking about your AT1 bonds or your tier 2 bonds, right, so these are basically ways through which banks can raise capital for themselves and obviously fulfill all the guidelines and norms that the RBI has also put in place. So from that perspective, 6,000 crore is something that a particular bank did basically approach for the AT1 bonds. There were other banks which are also trying to do something similar, but when you're specifically talking about 6,000 crore, the answer in this case is Punjab National Bank. SBI was also trying to raise money through the AT1 bonds route, but the amount was different in that case, right? So because it is 6,000 crore and specifically talking about AT1 and tier 2 bonds both or a combination, the answer in this case is PNB, and the first answer is basically HDFC Bank in this lot, right? So these are the answers overall for you guys. Let's move on to the next set of questions. Right. So talking about the date 25th of August 2021, the Union Finance Minister and Corporate Affairs Minister Nirmala Sitharaman basically unveiled the 4th edition of the Public Sector Bank Reforms Agenda, which is EASE, talked in the context of Enhanced Access and Service Excellence 4.0. This is for the period 2021-2022 for a tech-enabled, simplified and collaborative banking solution to a lot of the problems that we're facing in the banking sector, especially in the context of your public sector banks. So she also unveiled the annual report in terms of the performance of your public sector banks as far as the reforms agenda of EASE 3.0 was concerned, and this was for the period 2020-2021. Now the question is, which of the following banks was not in the top 3 banks in terms of overall performance in EASE 3.0 index? So SBI, BOB, Union Bank were definitely in the top 3. Now Indian Bank also received an award for a special reason, that it was probably the best performing bank, right, in terms of baseline performance improvement, right? So matlab, a bank which was not performing that great but showed significant improvement within this period of 1 year, that award was basically given to Indian Bank, right? Next up, we're talking about the next set of questions here, which is not a key initiative under EASE 4.0. So smart lending is definitely one of them. 24/7 banking with resilient technology, data-enabled agri-financing, collaboration with financial ecosystem. All these are definitely key initiatives as part of EASE 4.0. But Palm Banking and Banking on the Go were basically key initiatives as part of EASE 3.0. So that is the option that we're looking for in this question, right? So let's move on to the next set of questions now. Which public sector bank has merged with Canara Bank? So you should basically be able to answer this with your eyes closed. The answer is Syndicate Bank. Now talking about the Union Cabinet having approved changes to the Insurance Act for the change in terms of the foreign direct investment limit to the insurance sector, right? So that is basically to bring it to 74% from the earlier 49% that was there. So that is what the Union Cabinet basically approved in the context of the insurance companies. Next up, just wanted to highlight some of the other options here as well, just for jogging your memory. So Canara Bank, obviously with Syndicate Bank, then Bank of Baroda was with Dena Bank and Vijaya Bank, Union Bank was with Andhra Bank and Corporation Bank, and the Indian Bank was with Allahabad Bank. So Punjab National Bank also got merged, but since there is a relevance of Punjab National Bank and its mergers in the next couple of questions, so I'm refraining to answer the two entities here, right? So the answer to the next, obviously, insurance one was 74 and 49%. Let's move on to the next set of questions now. So which of the following statements related to the Financial Inclusion Index introduced by the RBI are correct? Now firstly, when you're talking about the Financial Inclusion Index, it does not have a base year, right? So this option is definitely incorrect. Now the annual FI index for the year FY21 was definitely 53.9, and in FY17 it was 43.4, which means that there is a significant improvement in the financial inclusion as far as India is concerned vis-a-vis what was there in FY17 versus what is there in FY21 now. Now, when you talk about the financial index parameters, yes, access, usage and quality are the 3 parameters, but the percentages have been given differently. So the access percentage is 35 and the usage percentage is 45, right? So this option again becomes wrong. So there's only one correct option, which is the option B, right? Now, which of the following global benchmark rates is expected to be phased out by December 2021? So the answer to this one is, again, should have been answered with your eyes closed. That is, you're talking about your LIBOR, which is your London Interbank Offered Rate. Now, technically, MIFOR, which is your Mumbai Interbank Forward Outright Rate, which is also linked to the LIBOR to a great extent, is also going to be phased out to along with LIBOR itself. And which are the alternative reference rates? which are essentially going to be taken over in terms of takeover as a replacement for LIBOR. That is basically SOFR and SONIA. So SOFR refers to your secured overnight financing rate, and SONIA refers to your sterling overnight interbank average. So these are the additional alternative reference rates that are there that are expected to take over, or let's say replace LIBOR, right? So those were the answers in this case, right? So let's move on to the next set of questions now. Which of the following bank or banks checkbooks would become invalid from 1st October 2021? So here is where the context that I'm talking about. The date is very specific. So Oriental Bank of Commerce and United Bank of India basically merged with Punjab National Bank, and basically Punjab National Bank came out with a notification recently, press notification, which stated that if you're a customer who basically owns a checkbook of either Oriental Bank of Commerce or United Bank of India, please get it replaced and get your checkbooks of Punjab National Bank, because these checks would become invalid starting 1st October 2021, right? So these were the two banks which got merged with PNB, and that was the context that I wanted to highlight. So essentially the answer in this case becomes both A and B. Next up, which of the following banks has partnered one of the leading fintech startups in the working capital space? And basically this bank has basically launched a customized overdraft facility for the over 1 lakh customers that are there for lending card, right? So which of these banks is it? It's basically SBM Bank India, which has partnered with lending card in this angle. So the answer in this case becomes SBM Bank India, and the first answer is both A and B, that is Oriental Bank of Commerce and United Bank of India. Okay, moving on to the next set of questions. Which of the following banks or bank continued to be under the RBI supervisory PCA framework, which is the Prompt Corrective Action Framework? So technically, UCO Bank has recently come out of the PCA framework. It just got out of it. Which was the other bank that recently got out of it? That was IDBI. Right, so both these banks have come out of it. Right, so because IDBI came out, it gave a lot of hope for UCO Bank to come out of it. And now the two banks that are still under the RBI's supervisory PCA framework is your Indian Overseas Bank and your Central Bank of India, right? So PCA framework obviously brings in additional supervisory guidelines that those banks will have to follow, certain restrictions that they will have to follow in their banking operations. So that is basically, you're constantly being monitored is a layman's way of explaining what PCA is all about. So from that perspective, IOB and Central Bank of India continue to exist. So the answer in this case becomes both A and C. Now, which of the following banks were involved in the execution of India's first set of swaption deal that was there in August 2021 to protect the borrower and the investors against any losses from the rate movements? So firstly, there are two derivatives involved here. So one is a swap. Right, so swap means interchange of whatever things that you want to change. That's in a very layman term. But when I talk about an interest rate swap, right, it refers to exchange of interest rates. Let's say there are two parties, A and B. One party is basically getting a fixed interest and the other party is getting a floating or a flexible interest. Then both these parties may not be comfortable with the kind of interest that they're getting, and they decide to swap their interest payment. So what happens is that A will start getting flexible and B will now start getting fixed if they go for a interest rate swap. Now what swaption means is that you're adding an option to avail the swap, right? So swaption contract will give the buyer the right but not the obligation to enter into an interest rate swap deal, right? So you may choose to get into an IRS, or you may decide not to get into the IRS. So that is what is a swaption. And which were the three banks that were involved in this? That was basically your HSBC, Standard Chartered and ICICI. All these three banks came together and executed the first swaption deal, and this is the first from an India standpoint. So the answer in this case is all of A, B and C. Right. So let's move on to the next set of questions. So a new scheme that is applicable with effect from 1st January 2021 formed to replace the erstwhile merchandise exports from India scheme, because there were some challenges with this scheme with regards to what was being said by WTO and the US as well. So that had to be kind of replaced with a newer scheme, and this will ensure that the exporters receive the refunds on the embedded taxes and duties that were previously non-recoverable. So you'll be able to, so the idea is to make your exports even more competitive. That's the whole thought process. So the answer in this case is RoDTEP. Now, which of these is the correct one? So, you're talking about remission of duties and taxes on export products and not remittance. So, that's not the correct one. Now, technically, rebate of state and central taxes and levies is also one of the schemes that are there, but specifically in the context of exporters receiving the refunds on embedded taxes and duties, RoDTEP is the answer in this case. Right. Next up, we're talking about question 34, which says August 2021, after a period of 8 months, RBI removed the restrictions and allowed issuance of new credit cards to which bank? So here the answer is HDFC Bank. So there were a lot of outages in terms of HDFC Bank's digital platform. And as a result, a lot of the initiatives that HDFC Bank had launched in terms of its digital banking as well have not yet been approved by RBI, but at least it has given a go ahead to HDFC Bank in terms of issuing credit cards again, which was obviously missing for quite some time, right? So the answer in this case is HDFC Bank and RoDTEP for these two questions, right? Let's move on to the next set of questions. We're talking about 35 and 36. So which entity has basically partnered with Mashreq Bank to provide UPI services in the UAE, and which was the first country outside India to adopt the UPI standards for QR deployment? So for QR deployment, the first country outside India that was partnered was definitely Bhutan. Now the confusion comes in between NPCI and NIPL. NPCI is the entity which is based out of India and is looking primarily at the India operations, and NIPL is the international wing of NPCI, which is your NPCI International Private Limited, which basically looks at tying up with providing services of NPCI or the payment systems that have been developed by NPCI to other countries. So from that perspective, NIPL is the entity which is partnered with Mashreq Bank to provide UPI services in the UAE. So UAE happens to be the next country. So first country was Bhutan. So the answer in this case becomes NIPL and Bhutan. Now RBI also recently introduced this web-based end-to-end workflow automation system to strengthen the compliance of entities. So the answer in this case is PRISM. PCA we have already discussed as prompt corrective action. It's got nothing to do with the end-to-end workflow automation. RCA is a part of the end-to-end workflow automation, wherein it talks about the root cause analysis to be integrated as part of a way to analyze how compliance is happening, right? DRT is the Debt Recovery Tribunal, and E is already we have discussed, so these are definitely not your answers. So the answer in this case happens to be PRISM, which essentially stands for your platform for your regulated entities for integrated supervision and monitoring. So that's what PRISM basically stands for. So these are the answers in this case. Moving on to the next set of questions. So Finance Minister Nirmala Sitharaman recently launched a Dash fund with a corpus of Dash for export-oriented small and mid-sized companies funded by Exim as well as SIDBI, right? So when Exim and SIDBI both are involved, it has to be something that SIDBI alone has not promoted, right? So Twarit and Shwas are predominantly initiatives taken by SIDBI alone, right? So obviously the corpus is incorrect as well, but Twarit and Shwas are very specific SIDBI related initiatives, so they cannot be my answer, right? Now technically the answer is Ubharte Sithare Fund. Now you cannot really literally translate it into English and call it Rising Stars Fund, so that will not be correct. So this answer is also incorrect. There is nothing called as SME Boost as such, so the answer in this case is Ubharte Sithare Fund, and the corpus is 250 crores, and this is a combined initiative for your export oriented small and mid-sized companies that have been launched by SIDBI as well as your Exim Bank. Now next up, which of the following statements is or are correct as per the recommendations of the expert committee on the primary urban cooperative banks? So these are latest guidelines that the RBI recently released. Now the first statement, which says that it was constituted by RBI under the chairmanship of NS Vishwanathan, who happens to be a former deputy RBI governor. Yes, this is correct. To ease the regulatory process, the committee recommended a 3-tier structure for your urban cooperative banks based on capital availability and other factors. Well, technically the statement is correct. The only problem here is it was not a 3-tier structure, it was a 4-tier structure. Then the committee suggested setting up of an umbrella organization. Yes, that's also correct, but with a minimum capital of 300 crore and not 100 crore, right? And a regulatory framework similar to the NBFC. So technically this would have been correct. Again, the capital is incorrect. Now UCBs should also be allowed to grant advances to the PCNPS, which is a perpetual convertible preference shares, right? So technically that is an additional option available for the UCBs, so they should be allowed. So that is again incorrect from that perspective. So the only correct option here is option A, and that becomes our answer, right? So as I said, these are the corrections in all your options. right? Okay, let's move on to the next set of questions now. Talking about which entity partnered with Visa to launch India's first numberless Visa prepaid card for your teenagers with personalized doodles. So this company has also crossed 2 million registered users and raised one of India's biggest Series A fundings of $38 million in June 2021. So the entity that I'm referring to is basically FamPay, right? So all the other entities are also there. Paytm is expected to bring out its IPO pretty soon, which is expected to be one of the biggest IPOs in the country, right? And these are other players that are there. BharatPay we already discussed in terms of latest developments. These are the other two players. PhonePe is one of the leading service providers as far as your UPI related transactions are concerned. So it is definitely the number one in terms of transaction value, right? So that is also there. So these are some of the other information available, but specifically the entity that we're referring to in terms of personalized doodle based numberless Visa prepaid card. So the entity that we're talking about is FamPay, right? That's the context. Now moving on to the next or the last question. One of the India's largest crypto exchanges, Dash, launched India's first NFT marketplace. So when I talk about NFT, it refers to a non-fungible token, right? So non-fungible token is what it means. So the answer in this case happens to be WazirX, which basically launched India's first NFT marketplace. Now, NFTs are basically your digital tokens, right, that basically exist on a blockchain, right, and they represent ownership in terms of digital items, right? Now when I say digital items, it could be any kind of artwork or it could be any kind of music. All of those things can be actually owned. And obviously the other angle is that your NFTs are interoperable, which means that they can be transferred from one network to the other network of the buyer's choosing. But the point is that because your NFTs are non-fungible, right, so they aren't fungible, which means they cannot be replaced by another NFT. So let's say, for example, there is one piece of art and there is another piece of art. So each of those artworks will be represented by a different non-fungible token, right? And it will basically carry a different key altogether, right? So NFTs are more like trading cards which can be exchanged, but one card cannot replace the other, right? And essentially when you're talking about the WazirX concept, the marketplace in this case basically has two components. One is obviously the spotlight, in which leading artists would display their work and basically auction would happen from that perspective. And the second one is Discover, which is more for normal users who can basically present their work as well. So that is basically the context in terms of the marketplace of WazirX having two specific segments, right? So the answer in this case, one of the leading crypto exchanges in India basically launched India's first NFT marketplace, and that happens to be WazirX. And these are basically some of the other exchanges that are there in India at this point in time, right? So these are the answers in this case, and that brings us to the end of the analysis of the test. So that brings us to the end of this particular session. I hope you enjoyed this in this format and the way you have attempted the test and actually looked at solving these questions. Obviously, these are very important 40 questions from the perspective of the last couple of months, and could have great relevance in the exam as well. One of the things which I wanted to highlight is, and it's obviously quite common to have this as an exam taker, right? So what happens is many a times you come across a string of questions which you're not able to solve, you're not able to attempt, and somehow you feel that I don't know the answer to this question. It's important at that point of time not to lose your thought, not to lose your concentration, because it's very easy to get diverted and let's just give up and then forget about the exam. And that's the most important thing that you need to remember. Even if there's a string of questions that you don't know, keep looking forward. The things that you know will definitely come somewhere in the exam. What you need to do is to find it. And very importantly, if it is tough for you, understand if you're a serious exam taker, if you're prepared well, it is tough for everyone, right? So always have that faith in your ability that if you're trying to attempt this paper, if you're finding it tough, if you're not finding those sitter questions, then it is tough for everyone else as well. So which is where it's important to stay calm, have that perseverance to look for those easy questions, those sitters, which you will definitely find in the exam. And if the paper is easy, trust me that it is easy for everyone else as well. So it's important that you do not lose your focus, utilize every single second that is there at your disposal, and have complete concentration and attention during the exam. Right, so these are the last minute tips that I would probably want to give at this point in time, but it's very important to stay calm, persevere, and find out those questions that you can actually solve, because at the end of the day, if you enjoy the process of taking the exam, trust me, every exam can actually be cracked, right? So it's not just about the preparation, it's about those duration of that exam time. If you give your best in that, you can definitely succeed. So with that, this is Ravi signing off. I wish you all the best for the exam, and I look forward to seeing you in the next session with some more interesting concepts. Until then, have a great day and a wonderful week ahead.